Welcome back, friendos. Unfortunately, my game dev journey has been slightly postponed by the fact that I'm in the middle of a semester that has 3 classes that are affectionately known as the Unholy Trinity. I am quickly learning how they got such a reputation. One of these classes is theoretical computer science, and at the end of the semester, I can turn in a project for some extra credit. And for this, I want to make a simple finite state machine that involves my fascination with space. Permit me 1 second to take my limited knowledge of state machines and explain them briefly. Imagine that we have some hypothetical machine, and that machine can pass through several different stages before reaching some final state. A more concrete example of this is something like a video game animation. We can think of a simple idle, run, and a jump animation. When you push the W, the character animation transitions from an idle state to a running state. When you push the spacebar, the character animation transitions into a jump state. And my grand idea for this project is to create a state machine that represents an empty solar system. And given 2 inputs, matter and some ambiguous yet enormous chunk of time, I could show the machine of the solar system going from nothing to a sun to a world and finally back to the start again. I really wanted to keep practicing some of my game development skills whilst in the middle of this shitty semester. So it's just gonna be something small, something neat to look at, and something kind of fun to play with.
That's what she said.
Now, before I start chunking off stages of the solar system, I actually wanted to get the base components in place. And step 1 is to simulate my own gravity so that we could have a sun and planets orbiting said sun and moons orbiting our planets. And this is achieved using the simple equation Mr. Newton developed quite some time ago, that the force of gravity is equal to the gravitational constant multiplied times the product of 2 masses divided by the distance between them squared. I wrote this function here that calculates this force and adds it to the planet, but I was having a problem. I couldn't even get close to a circular orbit or something stable. So I did a little bit more research and learned about orbital velocity and just how cool satellite motion actually is. Satellites are pretty much falling around the Earth. I highly recommend checking out the links I have in the description. Even still, this wasn't working, and I soon realized why. And even after adding some of these orbital velocity conditions, it still wasn't working, and I soon realized why. Gravity on Earth is given as a 9.8 meters per second squared. And the last part is kind of important. In my code, the gravity force is being applied many times a second, once every frame actually. Hence the over-ambitious gravity. So I moved this into the fixed update function in Unity that gets called every second, I believe. And voila, we have some circular orbits. In reality, the gravitational constant is tiny, something that looks like this. But this is my universe, so I made it 10. This way the planets and sun would not have to be quite so massive either. And this is all great, but it's very flat looking. So I went to Blender and hashed out some low poly planets and a sun. And the sun isn't very pretty, but I'll touch that up in a minute. I also knew that I wanted a moon rotating around my Earth, and I had a hunch that my code wasn't going to be able to accomplish this on the first go. Sure enough, I was right. The moon was orbiting around the place that the Earth was and not kind of going with the Earth in its own orbit, which makes sense considering the moon is also pulled by the gravity of the sun. So I added that extra force to its motion, and now we have our lunar companion in its rightful place. And this itself is rather mesmerizing to look at, and I spent quite a few minutes just listening to some Interstellar music and looking at this, and pretending I was Matthew McConaughey. At this point, I needed some color and depth that can only be achieved with particle systems and some scene design, so I created this neat little sun effect that I'm actually really happy with. Then I used more or less the same process to create this field of gas that will become one of our matter inputs later on. Now I could begin creating the states of the solar system. I needed a way to figure out how to spawn the Earth out of the particles without it breaking, so I opened up my Fuggin' with Particles project in Unity and started, well, fugging with particles. All I had to do was create a script that maintained the current state of the machine, which is just some integer, and depending on the value of that integer and whatever button the user presses, I had different objects spawn in and different effects happen, and this was actually a lot of fun for me to implement. You know, I get to picture what the lifetime of the universe is, and I kind of wanted to put in a bunch of different gimmicks. And, you know, I did have a time constraint, so I couldn't do all of them, and some of them aren't as polished as I would like them to be, but it was a lot of fun. Like, if you press the matter button and I really didn't have anything big to happen when matter comes, I just have an asteroid shoot past. Or at one point I thought about having aliens fly by and suck up a cow or something like that. And to be honest, the asteroid caused me more trouble than it was worth. And a large chunk of this little script and program just goes through the formation and development of the Earth. It goes from, you know, this molten rock to something a little bit more green, to having green trees and people, and then the people launch a rocket, and then an asteroid hits and it blows up, and, you know, you assume that the people are dead. And I really wanted the little rocket to land on the moon, but I couldn't quite figure it out. If you have any suggestions, let me know. And so it continued. I added about 9 different states to my universe, and it really stretched kind of what I'm able to do in Unity at the moment. You know, working with particle effects is a little bit different than working with normal game objects. Having pretty much all the objects in my scene moving was also difficult. Possibly my favorite visual of this little simulation is the black hole that I created that absorbs everything in the universe. I created this by actually going about halfway through a tutorial on YouTube that I can't find again, but I liked the halfway product much more than I liked the end result, so I just kept it how it was. And without further ado, this is what I turned in. Alright, well that is it for this video. It's kind of lame, little small, but you know, I did kind of the best I could with the time that I had. I've got the summer coming up, my future semester's a little bit easier, so I expect uploading to be more consistent. Anyways, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. See ya.
I saw a UFO outside the crib last night. Heard a knock